My name is Kobe Eisenstadt, and this is my podcast story. It was the end of the summer break, and everyone was returning to their school to get ready for another long, dreadful 10 months of learning. Some people were going to different schools. James was going to a different school. He just moved out to California at the end of the school year, and he was ready to start learning at Beverly Hills High School. James loved California during that summer, and he decided to join the school's football team. He's already been playing football his whole life, and he moved to Beverly to get a higher shot at getting recruited and playing Division I football. He knew that California schools are great, and that they were also where all the top competition was. He was excited. He couldn't wait for the upcoming football season to start. When he moved to California and joined the team, they had a long, hard summer workout. Sun beaming and 100 degrees every single day made those workouts very dreadful. It was all worth it though, because in just a matter of a week, practices were finally going to start. James walked into school for his first day. He couldn't believe the school and everything that was there. All the buildings and the facilities made it seem like a whole college. James still had to stay focused on football though. He couldn't get thrown off because of a nice fancy school. With practices starting in just 1 week, he was super motivated. He hit the gym for 3 hours after school every day and hoping to not just be the best receiver on the field, but to be the best receiver in the nation. James had set high expectations for himself, and he wanted to exceed those expectations on every single level. The season was just around the corner, and he wanted to be ready for anything that was coming at him. The days kept going around, and the Monday they came back to school, it was already practice time. James was a perfect student athlete. He had straight A's, and he was one of the best football players in the nation coming into his senior year. He got through the day, and as 4 o'clock rolled around, it was time to get the pads and helmet and head down to the field for his first practice at Beverly Hills High School. When James got down to the field, he went and stretched and warmed up. He was then sent off with the receiver coach for a series of drills that was pretty easy and basic for James. He worked on his hands and his footwork, which needed some urgent practice. Later in the practice, the coach ran one-on-ones for the receivers and the defensive backs. The coach wanted to see what James really had in his skills. The one-on-one started, and James lined up against 5-star recruit Bobby Sanders. Bobby Sanders was the son of NFL legend and one of the best defensive backs in the game, Deion Sanders. The coach said hike. James ran his route and caught the ball right over Bobby's head. The team went crazy, and coach took quick notice of James and the talent he had. After practice, Bobby saw James. Bobby told him, "Man, that was one heck of a catch." James replied, "Thanks, man. You covered that one nicely, though. You look like your dad out here." They parted ways, and James had to return home for his dinner. When he got home, him and his dad talked about how practice was, and they talked for about 10 minutes before going to eat some dinner together. A couple of weeks rolled around, and James still kept hitting it hard on the football field. It was game day today. Friday morning, James started getting ready for school and ready for his first game at Beverly. James went to all his classes, and all he could think about that day was that first game as a senior. This was the only time in his life where he would have his first senior year football game ever again. When he walked onto the field, it all sunk in. He was super hyped and ready to go get some touchdowns and try to take the win in his first game with his new school. James was ready and mentally prepared. And it was kickoff. James was back to return it. The ball was kicked and the game was underway. James caught it and started running through, around, and even jumped over someone on his way to the end zone, and it was his first kick return touchdown as a senior. The crowd was going insane, coach losing his mind on the sidelines, and the team was excited they get that first points on the board for the game. The game kept going, and with a game-winning touchdown by James, when the team got back to the locker room, they celebrated for a good 20 minutes. After the celebration, James's father took him out to eat at a local burger joint. The night went on, and they got home to a very big surprise. When James and his father got back home, they were stunned. They couldn't process what they just saw. During the game, robbers had broken into the house and took everything. Literally everything. Even James's bed in his room was gone. James's dad called the cops right away, hoping that they could do something. But when the cops came, they tried their best to help, and there's only so much they could do. In that instant, James and his father went from rich to broke. They lost all their money, and now we're going to be forced to move out of their home in Beverly Hills and into a smaller home in South Central, which is half an hour away from where they lived and 45 minutes away from Beverly. That means James had to go 45 minutes to school each day. That was going to be a problem, but James could always find a way to manage. The next day, James had to get up and go to school. He drove there and stayed for practice, which lasted 3 hours. James got back really late, and he was just ready to fall asleep. The next morning, James woke up, and it was game day, the second game day. James's day started like every other one, where he went to school, but he had a game that day. When he got to the locker room, James found the coach. The coach has a really sad look on his face, and James asked him what had happened. The coach told him that James's father had passed away in a car crash on his way to see James play his second game at Beverly. James was all alone now. No mom, no dad, no siblings, just him. James was still debating on if he'll be good to play tonight or if he has to sit the game out. It was a long decision and a hard decision, but he decided to play the game for his dad, because that's what he thought his dad would want. The first half rolled around, and James wasn't feeling himself yet. He had already dropped 3 balls. Not very good of him. The coach asked him, "You sure you can play right now, James?" James said, "Yeah, I'm straight." The team went out for the second half, and James said he was ready to ball. And he sure was ready to ball. Coming out of the locker room, he received the kickoff and took it all the way back, 104 yards. When the game finished, James ended with 10 catches, 3 touchdowns, and after that, the team went to celebrate. And then the coach asked James a question that could really have helped him right now. The coach asked James if he wanted to stay with him and his family, because James had nowhere to live right now. James, without even hesitating, agreed and moved into the coach's home. A few months went by, and James was still balling. He was ranked in the top 3 for wide receivers in the nation. He was ranked number 1 in the state, too. When Saturday came up, James had a press conference with a bunch of TV networks and sports writers. He was taken there to be asked a bunch of questions, but one of those really hit him hard. The reporter asked, "What's it like not having your parents alive, and what motivates you to succeed without them being here with you?" James took a second. He didn't even know what he should answer to the reporter. After a good 30 seconds of silence, James replied, "It's definitely been hard. Living without your parents, them not being able to show up for games, them not being on the journey with you. But it makes me want to battle harder every single day. It makes me want to go out on that field and be the best at what I do every single step of the way. They are the reason I'm here at this conference today, and not another player in the state of California. That deep response from James Given really shocked the press. They were all going to be so much appreciative of their life now. Time kept flying by, and before James knew it, they were in the playoffs. After going undefeated all season, it was time for the real season, a big show. These are the games that truly counted. Prior to the game, there was a team conference, and they wanted to discuss how different these types of games were. The coach mentioned things like that the state of California was arguably the most competitive playoffs in the nation. Each team really needed everything they had to offer every single playoff game. James knew what was ahead and was preparing himself all day for that first playoff game at Beverly. That game was tonight, on a beautiful Friday night. The players came out onto the field, and they were ready to do some damage. Kickoff was underway. Beverly came out on offense for the first time tonight, and on the very first play of the game, the quarterback, he threw a 50-yard ball to James streaking down the sideline. James made an unbelievable catch and getting his feet in bounds. Moments after the first quarter, scouts started flooding the stadium. Alabama scout came, LSU scout came, Ohio State scout came. Many more scouts came just to see James ball. With all the pressure that was on his back now, he still continued to impress, and he finished the game with 15 catches for 300 yards and 5 touchdowns. Moments after the game ended, the scouts started flooding the field. Everyone wanted to talk to James. All the scouts had something in common to say. Every single scout offered James to come in on a full ride and play for their football programs. James just didn't want the full ride. He wanted to go to the best school in the nation, and he wanted nothing less than that. After the game, James went back to the coach's house and studied some game film with him to see what Beverly could improve on next game. All the film studying helped because the team kept on rolling right through the rest of the postseason, and they eventually got to the state championship. It was the morning of the game, and James had just gotten up from his bed at the coach's house, ready to play the game of his life, of his high school football career. James had some breakfast and went off to school like it was any other day of the week. But the end of the school day wasn't like any other. He had a state championship game to win today, to win for Beverly. After school, the team was to report to the cafeteria where they got a pregame meal, and then they went to the locker room, and the coach had a little pep talk for them before the game. He came in and said, "All right, boys, this is it. This is what you've been working long and hard for all season. These final 60 minutes is going to separate you from the team that did it, from the team that almost did it. We've worked too hard all year to have almost done it. It's your time to shine. It's your time to be great, offense and defense. All right, let's go get this stuff. Family on me, family on 3. 1, 2, 3, family." And out the locker room came Beverly, hungry for their first state title, and sooner than later, the team was out on the field, ready to take their first state title against Malibu. Beverly was lined up, and the crowd was on their feet for the opening kickoff. On defense, they were falling apart. They gave up 70 yards, and Malibu marched all the way down the field to get an early 3-0 lead. And out the offense came, hoping to respond to that field goal, and they sure did. Number one player in the state, James, scored a touchdown, and sooner or later was the halftime with a score of 14-10. with Beverly barely staying in the game. Beverly was just trying to get a big leap on Malibu, but their defense was way too good right now. When Beverly came out of the locker room to start the second half, they were ready to try and score on this impressive Malibu defense. And onto the field came Beverly, hoping to extend their lead on the opening drive of the second half. It was a back and forth for the rest of the way, and it came down to 3 final seconds. Beverly, with possession on the 50-yard line, had to throw it all the way to the end zone to win the game. Quarterback said hike, and the play was off. He threw a Hail Mary, and the ball was going to the end zone, and touchdown! The one-handed catch on the sideline made by James just gave Beverly the state title. No one could believe it. They thought it was impossible. The team got the trophy and partied in the locker room. After the game, just days after his game-winning catch, James committed to play football at LSU, and his football career came to an end after 10 very good years in the NFL. James continued a very good life, finally making some great money, and he started a family. James made it and was successful all the way through life. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Have a great day.